Everyone, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us for this Intellectual Freedom for Iowa Librarians webinar. As you can see on this slide, and we'll share a little bit more on the next slide, this is a collaborative effort by the State Library of Iowa, the Iowa Library Association, particularly the Intellectual Freedom Committee, and the Iowa Association of School Librarians. There's a bit.ly link on this first screen that does get you to this slide deck, I believe. Next slide, Marianne. There we go. So as I said, you can get to this slide deck using that bit.ly link before. But each of these logos represent the three organizations that are here presenting tonight with contact information for tonight's presenters. So Marianne Morey is presenting from the State Library of Iowa. I will be presenting, sorry, I'll be presenting representing the Iowa Library Association, and Michelle Cruz and Diana Gears are here from the Iowa Association of School Librarians. We also had some assistance from a couple of other members. We had Tegan Deese, who was part of the planning of this event from the State Library, and Sam Helmick from the Intellectual Freedom Committee.
I actually put this slide in, so Amanda, maybe you weren't aware that before we got started that, we didn't even have a definition of what is intellectual freedom. And so if you're here tonight, maybe as a new person serving in a library or as a trustee or a school board member, and you've heard the term tossed around, but you're not sure exactly what it is, this is the official definition from the American Library Association with the four basic premises of it highlighted here. So intellectual freedom is the right of every individual, and I will say that's regardless of age, to both seek and receive information from all points of view without restriction. It provides for free access to all expressions of ideas through which any and all sides of a question, cause, or movement may be explored. So that just kind of sets the stage for what it is we're talking about tonight.
I will be dropping in the chat a link to the Iowa Library Association statement on book challenges across the state. This was co-signed by the Iowa Association of School Librarians, and you may have seen it come through your email inbox or across your social media feed. This is a statement that was drafted by ILA IFC, I believe in November, in response to the wave of challenges that we have seen in the last year. I took over as chair of Intellectual Freedom Committee in May of 2021. That is the right year. And I've worked with over a dozen libraries, which is just a very large number of libraries, and more than half of them have been school libraries. One thing that we wanted to kind of start off talking about is just the fact that while challenges in libraries can be really kind of emotionally draining and can be really difficult from a personal and a professional standpoint, if it wasn't okay for folks to express their opinions through a challenge, we wouldn't have that process codified in our policies. So you have a policy, or you should have a policy, whether you're a school library or a public library. It's, I believe, required by state law for schools, and it is required for certification in public libraries. And it's also just generally good practice to be prepared for these kinds of things in advance. So we hope that you leave tonight with just some general encouragement and maybe some good ideas for preparing you, your library, your staff, your board, possibly reviewing your policies and procedures that you have in your institution. But this statement that ILA and IASL provided is a good way to maybe start that conversation with the stakeholders in your community in response to some of the news items that we'll talk about later. So for tonight's agenda, we are going to go over a handful of items. This group of folks put together a resource list, and we all know ourselves well enough and are kind of projecting that out onto you, knowing that if we provided the resource list, a link right off the bat, a lot of folks would get distracted by that and clicking through all of the links on there. So we're going to talk about it, and then we'll share the official link to it closer to the end of the program. But Michelle's going to take some time to talk through the types of items that are available in the resource list. And then Marianne and I, Marianne primarily, we're going to talk about policies in public libraries, and then Diana and Michelle are going to talk about policies in school libraries. I'll wrap up with some kind of rah go librarians kind of talk towards the end, and then we will set aside quite a bit of time in this event for audience questions that really anyone can chime in on, but we'll probably be taking the lead on. So we're hoping to get to our Q&A session at about 7:30. So we have plenty of content to get through before then, but we did leave, I believe, half an hour for Q&A.
Yeah, and just type your questions in the chat as we go along. That's fine, because one of us is keeping track of the question lists, and we'll address those at the end, as Amanda said, at around 7:30.
Hi there. My name is Michelle Cruzy, and I am a teacher librarian in the Cedar Rapids Community School District. So welcome tonight. We're so excited to have you joining us. As Amanda said, we took some time and put together a list of resources for you so that you would have them easily at your fingertips. I know that a lot of times things float around in email, and it's hard to remember, where did I see that, or where can I access this at? So it's our hope to give you a start of a list of resources. Definitely, there are probably more things out there that we will add to it as we go along. So we're just going to take a minute to explain kind of the different headings that we came up with for the list of resources. And to start off at the top, we have all the excellent resources that the American Library Association provides to us. Everything from the Library Bill of Rights to some interpretation about that. Of course, the Freedom to Read statement. Two items that I found particularly helpful, the challenge support that I put there in purple for you. And then also I really like, and you don't have to open them up, Marianne, thanks.
Okay.
And also the how to respond to challenges and concerns. It's actually a checklist that I think you will find quite helpful. It goes through the beginning steps, including just what happens before when it is first a conversation that a patron or concerned citizen brings to you about a book. So before it even becomes a challenge, how can you work through that? And so that's a great checklist. You also have some specific resources to Iowa. So the website for Iowa's Intellectual Freedom Committee. There is a Google form there in purple. So if you do have a book challenge, whether you're a public library or a school library, there is a site there for you to report that to the Iowa Library Association so that they can help provide support to you. Again, we've linked the joint statement. Can you go back up just quickly? Thank you. The joint statement between IASL and Iowa Library Association for you to have again. There is a great LibGuide put together by Caitlin Brown, who is part of the ILA Intellectual Freedom Committee, but also the University of Northern Iowa Youth Services librarian. And she has a LibGuide there with some challenge resources for you that you will find helpful. We thought it would be helpful for you to know how to connect with other librarians, since sometimes we are aware that you might not have a connection close to you within your region of the state. And so some of those ways is the Library Talk Forum through the State Library of Iowa. I know as a teacher librarian, this was something that I just really learned about just a couple months ago. And so as teacher librarians, I know that we often use the SLIC 12 email distribution list to connect with each other, but I'd also invite you to check out Library Talk and to subscribe to some of the categories there. There are the Twitter sites for the State Library, the Iowa Library Association, and IASL linked there for you also. We wanted to give you some examples, and definitely there are probably far more examples that we could have listed here, but we provided a few examples for you of both school library and public library selection and reconsideration policies for you to take a look at. You can go ahead and scroll down. And then I think most importantly, a list of resources that definitely is not all inclusive. There are so many different resources out there for supporting the work that we have to do in selecting books to make sure that we are picking books that are diverse, equitable, and include all of our patrons and our students in the books. And so a great list of resources that many of us are familiar with, and some might be new to you also. So this is a list that we have for you, and it will be sent out after our session here today.
All right, excellent. So thank you to everyone on this committee that contributed to that. I think that's an invaluable list. I've been asked to provide information about policies from the public library perspective. And so I am here on behalf of the State Library of Iowa. And just to mention about Iowa and public libraries, we have 540 plus public libraries in Iowa. That is a large number of libraries for a state our size, for any state actually, but especially for a state our size. And the state library exists, among other reasons, to establish standards for those 540 plus public libraries, to provide continuing education for library directors, staff, and trustees, and to oversee distribution of state tax dollars to public libraries. The way that we oversee that distribution of state tax dollars is through the administration of the accreditation program, which is a set of standards that the state library is actually required by state law to develop and to administer. And those standards are all listed in the book titled In Service to Iowa, which can be found on our website. Standard 7 requires libraries, library boards specifically, you see there, to adopt 4 written policies. Most public libraries have far more than just 4, but these are the core 4 that every public library has to have. And that's circulation, collection development, personnel, and internet. So we're focusing tonight on that collection development policy. You can see that Standard 7 goes on to state this requirement that is part of that standard, and that says the library's adopted collection development policy is consistent with principles of intellectual freedom as found in such documents as the U.S. Constitution, the American Library Association Intellectual Freedom Manual, and the Iowa Library Association Intellectual Freedom Resource Guide. This is probably a good time to remind our trustees who may be in the audience that you are responsible for adopting all policies of your library. And that same Standard 7 that we just reviewed in the last slide goes on and requires the library board to be aware of the details of the policy and to say that the library board must review the policy at least every 3 years. Public libraries in Iowa are governed by administrative boards, and that's true of all but 3 of those 540 plus libraries. So therefore, it is the local public library board that has a huge and very important role to play in overseeing the public library for its community. And policy development is just part of that role, or one of the roles, I should say. Regulations and processes should both be in your collection development policy. So for example, under regulations, you might have professional reviews and professional journals noted as part of your selection criteria, while processes might designate that it's the library director or the director's designee who oversees the selection of materials for the library's collection. Your regulations would include the library's acceptance and template of its reconsideration form, while the processes would indicate how those reconsiderations are actually reviewed, for example, by a specific committee within a certain amount of time. These are some of the primary sections that your collection development policy will likely have. The purpose is the reason for your collection. You need to think about that. Why do we have these things available for our public? Is it to entertain, to educate, to inform, all of the above? That determines what you're going to select. And your policy will probably tell what it is you do include in your collection as well as what you don't include. For example, most public library policies say that they do not include textbooks in their collections. It's also going to explain how those materials are selected, what type of criteria you use to select those materials. Deselection is another word for withdrawal, or commonly called weeding your collection. How are we going to weed our collection, and what are we going to do with those items? Most public library collection development policies put their donations and gifts policy in that section. Sometimes this is a totally separate policy, but we often do find it in an overall collection development policy. And then your reconsideration policy is usually a subpart of your overall collection development policy. Reconsiderations, that's another word for a challenge. What are you going to do with any complaints or concerns that are solicited, issued by the public pertaining to your collection? Or sometimes it might even be toward programming or display. So on that resource list that Michelle just reviewed a moment ago, we have lots of sample policies from public libraries in Iowa. But the one that I'm using for tonight is actually from Bettendorf Public Library, again, a library here in Iowa. And this slide shows the table of contents, not for Bettendorf's full policy manual, but only for their collection development policy. So you can see that your collection development policy is pretty deep, or it should be pretty deep. And I'm not going to go through verbatim everything on in the policy for Bettendorf, but I did include each of the pages, most of the pages on these slides so that you can review these later when you have access to the slides. And the URL to access these policies from Bettendorf's library is available there on the slide as well. They start off with their statement of purpose, and that includes not only why they have their collection and the purpose of it. There you can see about education, information, entertainment, creativity, and leisure, but it also includes the library's mission statement, as well as their vision. And then they have a policy, a set of policy objectives. This policy includes a statement about intellectual freedom, and you can see that they do reference down here toward the bottom, the American Library Association's Library Bill of Rights, the freedom to read statement, the freedom to view statement, which they have included as appendix within their appendix, and that's an advisable practice. On this slide, you can see that they have a selection and maintenance section. This includes who is responsible for the selection, and it also shows that public input toward the selection of materials is welcome. This is the selection criteria. I mentioned this earlier. This is a vital part of your policy, because if and when you face a challenge, you need to be able to say, this is the reason we chose this item. We have based it upon these factors. It met these factors that we believe to be professional criteria that we use to select materials. And accompanying that is going to be your list of selection tools. We are using professional documents, professional reviews to determine what items are included in our collection. And I know that there was a library in Iowa recently that faced a challenge. And in the discussion by the library board, they did refer to these past two things, the criteria and the selection tools. Those were pretty vital in how they defended why they had the title in their collection. You need to address reconsideration. Here again, we see the Bill of Rights, Library Bill of Rights, the freedom to read statement. And pardon me, I have to cough a moment. I haven't coughed all day. And of course, when I start talking, then it starts. But you can see the items that they have included in their appendix. And this is advisable for all public library policies. It also shows how the reconsideration is handled, as I mentioned earlier. Your policy should also have the reconsideration form so the public can see that and know what is expected. If they should file a formal complaint about an item, this should be included in the appendix of your policy. I want to mention something especially because this topic just came up in my district the other day. And that is a question that we are often answered, we at the State Library often answer, or asked rather. If your library's policy currently includes a section that bars minors from fully accessing the library's materials or from using the library's internet, I encourage your board to rethink, retract, and revise such a section. The State Library's Law Library FAQ, which is on our State Library webpage, we pose this question, which, as I said, we get fairly often, and I just had this week, actually it was. And here's the question, the situation. Some parents expect library staff to ensure that children stay off the internet and don't have access to materials that parents consider objectionable. Is this the library staff's duty? There's a lengthy response on our FAQ. The short answer is no, it is not the library staff's responsibility. This is something that may differ from what you hear our school librarians say, but in the public library, library staff does not act in loco parentis, and that is the legal phrase meaning in place of the parent. Public library staff does not act in place of the parent. And so you can see that the library law response to such a situation is that maintaining a system in which the library cooperates with a parent to prevent a minor from using certain library resources puts the city in a legally vulnerable position and should be discontinued. The reason it puts the city in that legally vulnerable position is because you are violating the constitutional rights of minors to access information, and because you are also putting your staff in a position that they may not be able to completely uphold their end of the bargain, as it is, as the saying goes. For instance, if a new staffer comes in and the library said, oh no, we won't let your child access the internet, and the child sneaks onto the internet with his friend's laptop or with his cell phone, and how are you going to monitor that? How is a new employee going to know that that's the child that's not supposed to access the internet? You cannot really enforce that type of agreement, and so it's just an ill-advised plan. So do not have such statements in your policy. And just to conclude, the State Library has divided our state into 6 areas, purely for service reasons, for geographic reasons, that we can service all of the libraries in our state. Each of these districts has a degreed librarian serving as a consultant, and we are readily available to answer any of your questions. We will help you with policy development. We'll help you with collection development. We'll help you if you have a reconsideration situation at your library. So just contact us.
We're also happy to talk to you if you're just, shocked and surprised that you're getting a book challenge and all those sorts of things. So feel free to talk to us.
And Diana and Michelle, I think you're up.
All right. I am Diana Gears, and I am the AASL delegate for IASL. So that is why I'm here with our president. And we're going to talk just a little bit about how our policies are similar, and our guidelines are similar to what the state and public libraries have. But then, like Marianne stated, that distinction that makes things a little bit different when we're in the school setting. One thing for sure is that all schools should have a policy. So policies can be written in different ways, and we're going to give examples of different ways that they've been worded, and that's all fine. But one thing you should know, this slide is copied from Iowa Code, and the part C at the bottom that's highlighted is saying that board of directors of each school district shall adopt policies to address the selection and reconsideration of school library materials. And you'll see later that they also have policies for instructional materials. Sometimes they bundle those together. Sometimes they have them separately. There's no right or wrong with that, but I liked Marianne's word, advisable practice. Not that you can change things right at the moment, but if things are all bundled under the same umbrella, it would be advisable to try to be a part of that conversation and try to have some separate guidelines for your library materials. And Michelle is going to go on for the next portion.
go ahead and advance it again to the next. Is this where we wanted to be, Diana?
Yeah, that's good. I didn't know if you were going to talk about the diversity piece or if you want me
Oh,
to talk
sure.
about this right now. Okay.
So I think we can just take comfort as school librarians in the fact that really the public librarians and our policies, there are many similarities here, right? And so really our role as school librarians is to be able to provide that equity and access for our students through our collection. And so the collection policies that we have, the selection and reconsideration policies, they help us guarantee that we're going to be able to provide those resources for our students, that are going to be able to provide our students for that ability to see themselves in the books. And in school, in library school, we often talk about that as students being able to see themselves through windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors in those books and resources. And so, yeah, Diana's going to go on and show a few examples here for us.
Yeah, and it's also, it can be scary as we hear that challenges are coming, but you'll know this is nothing new. But I think when we start going through these guidelines and knowing that it's a law that your district has to have this, so then let's go to that document because they've got your back. They've got their guidelines written out. They may need to be readdressed. That would be a conversation for a current or later time, but just knowing what those policies are is going to help you be able to take a breath and know, okay, I have been doing what I'm supposed to do. And it is backed by Iowa law. It's backed by our Constitution and all of those things that Marianne talked about. So this example right here is from North Scott Community School District. We have not picked like the best of or the worst of. We're not sharing any of these as a way of comparing anything. It's just to look at, here's how one place did it. And so in the slide deck, I have linked in their selection policy as well as their reconsideration policy. Those are all available on their school district website. So I'm not taking anything private or anything like that. But one reason I highlighted this was just that context, that framework, kind of the purpose of their library, just talking about within here, they do reference the School Library Bill of Rights and the ALA right to read, the National Councils of the Teachers of English, and they talk about instructional materials need to be at different reading levels. They need to represent diversity of appeal, not just diversity of characters, but different types of literature and different representations of different points of view. And again, and also allow people to complain or state and file a complaint if they feel that something is inappropriate. It's all part of that freedom of speech. And so it's okay if they're doing that. And we'll go look at the next slide. And this is from North Scott again, and this looks at how they have then on section F, they've talked about that they have good judgment and that they're complementing instructional materials and library materials. And then they do break theirs down into who is responsible for the selection. And you see there in A, they have media center materials. They have guidelines for that. And then B, classroom centered curriculum materials. And so I do appreciate that those are called out separately because the library is there for a different purpose than just providing curriculum resources. So this helps open the window or the windows and the doors, I guess, for libraries to deal with content beyond what is just the curriculum.
So this example here, and I don't know, Marianne, if you can open it up with the link in the top right-hand corner. So Iowa City Community School District is in the process of revising their selection materials. And so they were able to share that with us. And you notice here that it's watermarked that it is in a draft format. So the thing that I appreciated as I was working on the Cedar Rapids revisions just in seeing in the Iowa City example, is that they do call out some definitions here for instructional materials versus library materials, because as Diana mentioned, in an ideal state, they might be two completely separate policies, but for most of us in our school libraries and through our board policies, it is one policy. I like here how Iowa City even went so far to designate or to define classroom library materials falling under the regular library materials selection policy, because classroom libraries are such a big thing now. If you go ahead and continue to scroll down a little bit, at the top here, oops, yeah, keep going, keep scrolling. Thank you. So here they go on to kind of define some overall arching policies for their selection and of library and instructional materials. And then if you keep scrolling down, I like how they also reference that part of their policy, you can go ahead and stop, will be involving students, community members, teachers, staff, that there are multiple people involved in the selection policy. And I think we saw that too in what Marianne showed at the state level for public libraries as well. And then the nice thing that I like about Iowa City's example is that they go on to define specific guidelines for instructional materials. And then on the next page, they define separate parameters for school libraries. So I think this is just a solid example that we can that we have here to look at. You can go ahead and close this document out and go to the next slide. Thank you, Marianne.
Okay.
Did you want to? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So just knowing again what your district is expecting and what they say, just become familiar with that so that you've got that to use as part of the conversation. But it's also a great opportunity if you're concerned, if your administrators are concerned, this is a great opportunity. And I heard recently, like, libraries and librarians are not usually headlines of the news. So, use this as a great opportunity to communicate with others about all of the different work that you do when you're selecting, all of the different things that you take into consideration as you're meeting the needs of your own school community, but also looking at those windows, looking at those diverse perspectives and, what has always been in the library. And then let's challenge some of those ideas, not challenge, but let's have books that also represent other viewpoints so that we can build our critical thinkers that can start to think for themselves. It's a super important, and it's also the critical thinking and learning how to make your own decision is part of many different curricular areas. So there's a lot of times that could just be tied right in. But anyway, we're going to move on from that and look at reconsideration as well. And so this example is from Benton Community School District. And I threw this one in here just because it talks about even the process of what happens if someone finds something objectionable, and they even spell out, like, here's what's supposed to happen. And so knowing this, because this can also get districts in trouble if we don't follow what they have in writing, we want to make sure and let your administrator know, I've got your back also. So if someone comes to me with a complaint per our guidelines, this is what I've done. I've talked with them, and we seem like, according to their policy here, it says try to resolve that issue informally. And so then you would go on and talk to your administrator and monitor the situation. So if that's what your policy says, then you want to make sure you're following that. And so whether or not they have that in writing, it's good to know what your district has. And then also if there are things that you think need to be added now or later, again, your district, your building, to know if and when it's the right time to approach. Maybe, gosh, let's look at this. Do you think we need to add anything else? And be a collaborator with that administrator in your district, because if you happen to notice something that they didn't realize, you're going to be helping them so that they don't end up getting themselves in trouble for not following that printed document and guideline that they already have publicly available. Okay, next slide. And then Michelle can talk about this, but I selected this also because it goes on to explain even if you have a reconsideration committee and guidelines like that. So understand what that process would be if it does go to a more formal complaint. And Michelle will talk more about Cedar Rapids.
Thanks, Diana. So one of the hats that I wear in my position at Cedar Rapids is the content lead for teacher librarians as part of the teacher leadership grant for the state of Iowa. And so I had the opportunity then to work with some of the curriculum administrators and the secretary of the school board this fall to make sure that the language on our new website, which is I think the clip that Diana has here, was reflective of our policy, and also to make sure coming out of COVID, probably was a little lax, right? Because, people just were not meeting in person. And so making sure that we actually had the people listed here on the slide designated. And so I think just an important thing is our role as librarians is always about advocacy and building those positive relationships with our administrators and the people that we work with so that we can have a seat at the table and make sure that we're involved in these conversations. And so through building those relationships, then they were able to reach out to me and have me work to select the people to be on our Reconsideration Committee to make sure that we had representation of parents and students and the right district and curriculum people at the table for reconsideration, and to make sure we understood our policy, like when we would meet if we had a challenge come up and such. So just continuing to work on advocacy and building those positive relationships with the people in your district so that when the time comes, if there's a challenge, you can have a seat at the table and be part of that process and feel good that you're following through with that process. So we added this slide just so that you were aware of some current activity going on in Iowa. As Diana said, often you don't think of librarians as maybe making the news or newsworthy, but there are some things going on in Iowa, and obviously we've had some challenges, and there are even some things happening in the legislation. So we included these articles and also a link to know how to find your legislator.
And I believe Amanda might be expanding on some of those.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yep. And just to kind of let school librarians know, we have, as of yesterday, the gentleman from Every Library, the nonprofit, has reached out to us as an organization to try and see how he can help. And he, and along with Iowa Library Association, was helpful a couple years ago when there was also some activity in Iowa about the role of teacher librarian. I think sometimes I just kind of want to give a plug because I know from a teacher librarian standpoint, there might be some people online tonight with us that are not members of Iowa Library Association and IASL. And I think sometimes we question, like, why should we be a member of ILA and IASL? And I think advocacy and the fact that you know that we are working for you through these issues, these are some of the reasons that your membership in Iowa Library Association is so important and the value of the membership. So.
I'll chime in now and talk a little bit. I'm going to drop a link in the chat. I'm sure it's not all committee approved. The link to the ray gun, just another sinister teacher t-shirts. I don't know if you saw that on your social media at all, but if you are interested in, the hilarity that Reagan usually provides, this might be a good option for all of us educators, or all of you educators. They are pretty good with that fast turnaround. So yeah, I'm sure you've all seen some of the news about the calls to either very broadly change the penalties in Iowa and remove some exceptions that are made for schools and for public libraries in terms of providing really obscenity to minors. Yeah, right now there are exceptions made for libraries and for schools because of the nature of the missions of those organizations are about free and voluntary inquiry. And to be pretty candid, libraries and schools do not provide obscenity to minors. That's not what we do. We provide information, we provide education, we provide recreational materials, we provide entertainment, but the obscenity as narrowly defined is not provided in libraries. So there's a lot of kind of blustering conversation around this, but the link at the bottom left where it says find your Iowa legislator, that is a link that I hope that you all click on and you all send a little email to your representatives. The Iowa Library Association's Lobby from Home Day is coming up in February. And then there's always the day where librarians from across the state come to Des Moines and talk to their legislators face to face. I'm not sure if that's going to be virtual again this year. It was virtual last year. But while the ideal is that we're communicating with our legislators, with our stakeholders, just kind of all the time, we realize that sometimes we all need a little push in the official day to remind us that these are things that we should be doing. So this issue of intellectual freedom and some of the conversations going on across the state are not a part of the Iowa Library Association's official legislative agenda, as it was approved by the full membership of the association. But everyone is more than welcome to go off script and make sure that your legislators are hearing your thoughts on the conversations that are going on. I think you can go to the next slide. Thank you. I also want to talk a little bit more about the Iowa Library Association Intellectual Freedom Committee and the Office of Intellectual Freedom. So the committee and the Office of Intellectual Freedom are here to support you no matter what stage of a process you're involved in. So whether you are just taking some time to review your policies or want some continuing education for staff or for your trustees, that's something that ILA and IFC can help with. If you are in need of a listening ear, you feel like maybe something's going to happen or something is happening in your community and all you need is someone to kind of commiserate with, give me a call. You can call anybody on IFC. We're happy to help with that. We also help with doing research. So we've helped pull together resources for a number of reconsideration committees this past year. So this group put together a resource guide that we're sharing with you. IFC will pull more specific to your situation resources that you could use. So that might be, why is it important for there to be sex education in schools, or, what is the value of, having traumatic or difficult topics in libraries. But if we can find, peer-reviewed articles or other types of resources for you that can be contributed to a committee's packet of information to consider, that's something we're also happy to help with. And we have folks who do a lot of intellectual freedom work and have this as a good background, so we can usually try to find your answer. I'm also very often calling Mandy Easter and asking her questions to, on behalf of librarian who's asking me a question that I just don't know the answer to. So just like all good librarians, we might not know the answer, but we know where to find it, and we're happy to be that go-between for you.
I'm just going to clarify that when you mentioned Mandy's name, that's the law librarian with the state library. So the state library does have the law library. So anybody can contact the law library and ask a question and get legal information.
And Marianne spoke about the law library FAQ, I believe, and those are, I believe, provided by Mandy on the state library's website.
Right.
So while another thing that we can all do, rather than kind of going so far outside of our circles and speaking to legislators, is we can try to find ways to support each other. I am the former director of the Orange City Public Library, and we had a bit of an intellectual freedom issue a few years ago. And I still have a potted plant on my windowsill that I don't even know who sent it to me anymore, but some librarians somewhere, you know, took it upon themselves to send me a plant, and it's all little succulents, and it's like your little moment of zen. I remember that's what the note said, and it was just like this really kind and personal to me gesture. We were receiving lots of notes directed to the board and the library generally, but you know, to help take care of the librarians in your circle or the librarians that you know, or even that you just know are struggling, that can be so helpful. So if you are able to, if you live or work in a community where there's something going on, or there doesn't even have to be anything going on there locally, there's plenty going on statewide, if you could write a short email, take 5 minutes to write an email to your local library, to their board, to your city council, to your board of supervisors, anyone who is probably hearing some of this and wondering what it's all about. If you can speak out and take some time to speak on behalf of your peers in the libraries, that's incredibly helpful. If you're able to attend meetings, even if you're not there to get up and speak, but you can sit in the back row and clap when somebody makes a public comment and show support for that, that's really great. Of course, using the materials, if that's a possibility. I think this is probably easier in public library contexts than in school library contexts as adults. But if you can talk up these materials that some folks might find objectionable and ensure that they're seeing use in the library, that can go a long way in justifying their continued existence in that collection. Yeah, if you can have conversations, especially with your patrons or your neighbors or your community members. I distinctly remember having a conversation with a couple of parents about why, if their kids wanted to check out an R-rated movie, I would let them do that. And it was all very empowering to their children's rights. And I would never dare to infringe on their children's First Amendment rights. And that includes R-rated movies. And, you know, they were really excited about that. And so if you can have conversations, if it comes up, try to have them, even if it feels weird, even if you can only talk to a couple of people a week or a month in your service area, in your patron base, or even, you know, speaking to your students about what their rights are, because I know that student voices at school meetings can be really powerful as well. If you can give them some of that language and some of that background, that can go a long way to support your cause. And you're already doing a great job by attending this meeting, but if you can be prepared for your challenges, if you can know what it is that you need to do, or what you will be called upon to do, or what those around you should be doing, it can be really helpful. And it can help you feel more in control when controversy comes to your front door. It can be really jarring and really, really difficult. And it can be really, it can make you feel like you're kind of on your own, like maybe you against the world, especially if it's you against maybe some administrators or other city leadership or things like that. But if you know what it is that your policy calls for, what the laws call for, what the Supreme Court decisions say, if you have all of this information behind you, if you have our resource guide, little plug there for it, handy, and you know who to call, which is us, everybody here on this panel tonight. If you're prepared, that'll help a lot. And we are more than happy to get involved and to help support you and anyone else that you know who's dealing with an intellectual freedom issue. Also, the Iowa Library Association Intellectual Freedom Committee operates a little bit differently than a lot of other committees in that you do not have to be a member of the Iowa Library Association to get support from IFC, just like with the state library. I'm sure I'm speaking for Marianne and Jay here, but I'm sure that any library who calls and asks a question and needs assistance, we're more than happy to either be that support or to help direct them to the right place. So never hesitate to reach out.
Right. All right. With that, we turn to the audience for question and answer. Jay, my colleague, I'm a consultant for the Central District, and Jay is consultant for North Central District. We're two of the 6 that I mentioned earlier. Jay was keeping an eye on the chat. What kinds of questions came through, Jay?
We have a lot of different stuff here. And I'm sorry if I get your name wrong or maybe here, but I'll try and read them best I can.
Just go by first name.
Yeah.
Okay.
Rachel said something about, is it legally possible for the state legislature to charge school employees with felonies for circulating obscene material as some incentives have proposed, or is that just a bluff? So that's a great question. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think maybe our law librarian is in the audience, so perhaps she'll type a response. Not any of us here is an attorney, so I would have to answer that by saying, I will get back to you on that. Classic librarian answer, right? I think we're going to probably gather all of these questions. Jay, you'll save the chat for us. And any questions that we either don't have time for this evening or we don't have the right person to answer that question, we will definitely post those as follow-up and perhaps include those discussions in our March session, which more about that in a moment, but we are doing a follow-up to this presentation tonight. We'll be doing a second presentation in March where we'll delve into more topics. So that would be a good one to discuss then. Anybody else want to add to that?
I think that would be a great one to dig into more.
Okay.
I will hazard a guess, prefaced with the I am hazarding a guess here. I had a similar conversation with a friend today, actually. As the law stands now, no, hopefully, no, not that they can't threaten or investigate, whatever it is that their local authorities are willing to do. Mandy chimed in.
Yeah, the legislature can pass any law that it likes, but the constitutionality of laws is judged by the courts, and the courts would uphold the First Amendment and strike down such a law. So, and Mandy, if you ever want to talk, let me know. I can turn on your mic.
And when I was talking to my friend earlier today, it reminded me of, the divisive concepts bill, that the legislature could pass whatever they wanted. They could codify something and it would be up to some sort of challenge of that law to see how it all shakes out. But that would take, an individual impacted by that legislation to take up that cause. So hopefully it's just a bluff. Hopefully it's a lot of positioning, but I don't think that we can count on that.
And I think also when we look at school policies, and if they're talking, there were some of those policies that we wrote and they even talked about having items, even though they might be controversial, and that can't be the reason we don't get things. I saw that specifically in some school policies. And so I think that's important to remember, and that I know Joan is on here as well, and she has said some really insightful things I've learned from her as well, about that right now they're not challenging specific books, they're challenging concepts and ideas. And so even if it's a book that you feel really strongly about, know that a lot of things that are happening right now are not about a specific book, it's about an idea. And so if we choose to remove all of those ideas, then what are we going to have left? But you all know this, that's why you're here. But yeah, it gets scary when you hear that kind of language.
Real quick, Jen wrote in the commentary, her father is an attorney and suggested that it would also require a prosecutor who'd be willing to prosecute a teacher for that account as well. So, stands to reason. Thanks, Jen.
Jay, what's another question that came through?
Yeah. Anne said, what can non-librarians such as parents do to support intellectual freedom in our schools?
All the things that I listed in my supporting each other. So if you are able to send an encouraging note to your school librarians, to your administrators in your schools, to your library boards, to your city, that's a really great way to, and to your legislators, is just to make sure that our side of things, that's not a great way to say it, but that there are people in the community who are paying attention and who do value this. And it's not just those who have the platforms and those who have the voices that get listened to, that get to make the decisions for all of us. They're, yeah, go ahead.
I would also answer, like, from the reconsideration side, like, parents can help support through that committee. So having to reach out this past fall and contact a number of parents to be involved in that sort of committee when they're called upon, of course, right? It's not like it's a committee that regularly meets if they don't have to, but just maybe talking with your school librarian or somebody that you might know within the district to see if that's a way that you can help, because I know we all feel pressed for time. And so that is another good way that you can help, is just to be part of that process.
Okay, how much more time do we have? Another 10 minutes?
We've got about 25 minutes.
Oh, great. So we got tons of good content. John is asking, what should be done if the objection to an item in library is based upon objecting to one or more elements of the library policy? And this is from a public library trustee at Velisca, right? That's Velisca. You can say that.
So they're objecting not to necessarily what's in the library, but to the policy that says what they will contain in the library. And
yeah, that's my understanding of it. I was trying to parse it out, but I think
most public library policies, as I shared earlier, talk about they contain materials to enlighten and educate and entertain and inform. I would hope no one is complaining about educating, enlightening, informing, and entertaining in that regard. So I guess I would have to see the policy to better understand the situation. I think that if this is a trustee asking a question, perhaps looking at these sample policies that we have provided in the document that we'll be sharing with all of the attendees tonight, where we have the examples, looking at those. And by the way, before somebody asks, why are all the examples from big libraries? The answer to that is because most of the large libraries do have their policies vetted and reviewed by their city attorney. And so we believe these are policies that have already gone through some legal eyes, and they are likely the best examples that any library of any size can follow. So I would recommend that the board compare their policy with what those other policies look like, and then definitely reach out to their district consultant at the state library and say, what do you think of our policy? What do you think of this challenge we've had to our policy? How can you give us some advice and some help in this regard?
I would also add, that, it is, community members can come to your library board meetings and explain why they are against certain portions of your policy. And then it's up to your board of trustees to take that into consideration and whether they would like to review their policies and make sure that they're doing that in accordance with our professional ethics and their legal requirements. But the question made me think of, I know there are some libraries in the state that do not collect R-rated DVDs. So it could be, maybe a person comes from a community where that's the case, moves to a new community, sees that there are R-rated DVDs and wants to complain about that portion of the policy. That's an opinion that they are allowed to bring before your board. And you could try to shoehorn that into a request for reconsideration type format. I'm not sure I would necessarily recommend that, although it might be a good way to just have that framework in mind of have professionals involved in that decision making, make a recommendation to the board, or collect supporting documents for that. But yeah, just like they can come in and make comments about really anything, complaints about how the policy is actually written or what the policy allows, is something that could be brought before your board.
Alicia has a really good one here. She says, strong policies are essential, but many recent book challenges at public school board meetings have resulted in boards completely bypassing policy and procedure. Do you have any comment or any tools to deal with this panel?
This reminds me of something that I actually brought to Mandy, I think it was last week. And it was a little bit of a different situation. But the conversation was kind of focused on the fact that your board, so your school board or your library board, is answerable to your community. So your administrator, so just like a director is responsible to a board of trustees and a superintendent is answerable to the school board, those governing bodies are answerable to the people who they represent, who they have been elected by, or who they represent as a trustee. And that may be your best bit of recourse. Maybe Mandy will chime in again with some other great ideas. But I always just, when I talk to librarians where this is happening, I encourage them to use we statements with their administrators. I would hate for us to get in trouble for not following our policy. This is the policy that our governing body has put forward that we should be following. How can we get this back on track so that we are following the policies that are set forth? And there's only so much of that you can do. I get that.
And added to that, because I think this is a good place to mention this, it is just vital, I believe, absolutely vital, that your trustees in a public library, on your public library board, and I would assume the same could be said for the board members of a school board, that they are trained in knowing what their duties are, in knowing what these policies are and what the laws are and the standards are and all the things that we've shared this evening. They have got to know that information, and they have got to take advantage of the training that's offered. And I can speak to every single public library board out there. Your state library will gladly provide training. We already have it in the trustees handbook. We have webinars that are recorded. We present things live like this evening. We will come to your library and talk to you. We are here to provide that information. So make sure those individuals receive that training. That's all out there.
If I could just interject too, one thing I would say is that sometimes you kind of know that these things are sort of bubbling under the surface, right? So you might have heard about it through the principal or through a teacher. And so looking back even at like that ALA checklist, like what are some of the steps you can take before it gets all the way to the school board, or what are the steps you can take before it becomes a challenge? So, if there's a way that you can have a conversation with a parent or the community member that is sort of having the complaint before it even gets that far, to kind of have insight into what they're thinking or what they're objecting to, or the rationale for, your selection policy and for why things are there. So I think sometimes just having those open lines of communication with the administrators that you're working with, and again, that comes to advocacy and to building those relationships, so that if those things are happening underneath the surface, you're in a good position with those people that they're willing to come to you and say, hey, I've had this parent bring up this situation, like what's the next step? What do we do? Because sometimes, administrators are at a loss too for what they need to do, and they're busy. And so they're maybe looking to get that checked off their list and move it along in the process where maybe it doesn't need to go all the way to a formal challenge process.
All right, Jay, I think we've got about
Okay.
maybe another 12 minutes or so,
Oh, okay.
15
Well,
minutes
okay.
maybe. So what's another
Yeah,
question we have?
Laura asked that she's saying that the state library recommends that we do not have a policy that stops minors from accessing sites that are highly inappropriate. In general, policy states these sites cannot be accessed when other minors might be sitting nearby and see it, and because the site could possibly cause a virus to computers. Do you have a thought on where this falls in? This is more of a filtering question, I suppose.
Yeah, I would recommend that the library gets some decent malware protection for their public computers so that they don't have that such substantial risk of viruses. And there are filtering options for public libraries. Any library that participates in E-rate, which is a government program that provides for the expense of your internet provider services, you do have to have a filter. So there are different levels of filtering that can take place. Filtering has improved a great deal since a few years ago when it was not something that anybody would have ever recommended. But there are filters that will, weed out that bad stuff. And as I understand from our law library, child pornography is never allowed. That's illegal. So obviously you're not going to allow that for anybody. But to make a determination that, I think that game is inappropriate for your age level, and I don't like that game, I don't think you should be playing it. That's getting into that area that you probably don't want to approach. And I would recommend again that you reach out to your district consultant, reach out to the law library at the state library, and talk to us about your specific issue, because it's kind of hard to answer a question without knowing the exact details.
Yeah, Joan just asked while we were talking, she mentioned something about the filtering only required on children's computers for E-rate. I don't know, that probably does not apply to schools, but in public,
understanding.
no, well, but I'm saying I do know that the public library, it has to apply towards every device that's hooked into the internet. So just so you know.
Yeah.
Okay, other questions. John's asking, what do you suggest in case where a person or persons take it into their own hands to remove material from a library that object to? Does anyone have any thoughts on vigilante circumstances?
I have some experience with that. And actually, there's another library that I assisted over the summer that they had a patron who checked out some materials and refused to return them. So without being able to prove malicious intent and that a crime was intended to be committed, Helen, I would say follow your policies for lost materials.
Well, there is a state law that says failure
Yes.
to return public library materials, failure to return it within a reasonable amount of time is considered theft.
Yes.
And we do have information about that we can share with the library, and you would have legal recourse to go after, I hate to use that phrase, go after that person, but to insist that person compensate for those materials.
Yes. Yes. Excellent points that I was hoping to get to.
Oh, sorry.
No, don't worry about it. It's fine. Yeah. So you probably have in your policy, and even if it's not in your policy, it is in state law, that if these items are stolen, then you should treat them as such. I know this is something Mandy has talked about on, I know Library Talk quite a bit. So in the case of the library where they were just very, very long overdue, not returned, it was a small town where there was a lot of, word got around So there was just some explanation at the library board meeting about what it meant for things to be stolen from the library, and that someone could conceivably be prosecuted for such an offense. And those materials happened to find their way back to the library Dropbox. You likely have a policy in place for billing for long overdue materials. And so that's what I would encourage you to do when it's, something that's checked out that just doesn't come back. Replace the items if that is what you would have done had they been damaged. If they were a part of your collection that you would have replaced for other reasons, go ahead and do that. Make sure that you bill the patron so that they have to make the library whole for that loss. If they don't actually get checked out, that's a little bit harder, so you might not be, if you have evidence of some sort, if you happen to be in a library that does have security cameras, or that you can, which I don't really recommend, but I've worked in libraries where that's the case. I don't recommend it necessarily from an intellectual freedom, confidentiality of records kind of perspective. You can't be forced to turn over that which you do not have type perspective, but you have other recourse as well if things are kind of more actively stolen as opposed to the passive not returned type of stolen. But yeah, it's a tough topic.
For sure, Amanda. Yeah.
It just depends. It depends a lot on the situation.
Yeah. This is a school question, I think. Where's the info support on policy procedures about requests from parents to limit their students' access to certain materials in school? From Erica.
I think we were wondering about is there a document with the wording for that? Is it in our policies at all?
I think she's one. Yeah, that's what she's wondering. Yep. I mean, there's no one place. That's what you're saying.
So I think, Erica, are you asking what kind of information we would have for school librarians who are getting those requests from parents, and how do we kind of push back against that? Push back against their attempts to opt out of that which there is not necessarily already an opt out.
Yes, advice for dealing with requests from parents. She's quite right.
And I know earlier you said the statements that a couple of reasons why that won't work, but so one is that we can't guarantee that they're not going to access it when they're in the library without checking it out. And that is a decision between parent and child, and that our role is to provide content. But now I want to do some digging and see if there is verbiage on official documents from AASL or anything about, this is the foundation. Would that be maybe in the right to read kind of statement? I'm just wondering if there's some professional verbiage that she could link back to, right? Especially if you're not full-time, then that would also help, but.
Yep. Elaine's asking to if you form a committee to reconsider, who would you want to be on that? It's a public library.
First of all, I would say look at your policy to make sure that that is part of your process for the reconsideration. And sometimes it is actually spelled out in your policy. It was on the times that I dealt with the reconsideration, and it specified that the library director, a library trustee, 2 members of the community, and I think there was a 5th person, which I can't recall right now the criteria, but it spelled out who was supposed to be on there. And when it called for community members, I chose community members who had the most logical connection to the type of material that was being challenged. For example, if this was a book for a teen, I chose a parent of a teen, or I chose an educator that dealt with teens of that age. But definitely look at your policy to see if it specifies.
The policy that my current library has, so I'm the director of the Dubuque County Library District, and our policy specifies that the committee will be formed consisting of at least 2 board members, the library director, and 1 library professional whose job description includes collection development. So it takes it, even though the director at my library isn't responsible for the actual selection and deselection of materials, that's a task that's delegated to other staff. So it's not the staff who made the initial decision who are involved in that decision, but it's someone else who is, and it could be a library professional from the library, but we often would, or we would try to get someone from a different library who isn't associated with the collection itself. So Erica, who asked one of our earlier questions, she's a local librarian for me. So she is someone that I could possibly call on as a librarian with collection development in their job description who'd be put on that committee. But yes, involving community members or parents or even students. I've seen students on these reconsideration committees as well. But I would recommend, if you're going to be revising your collection development policy or a request for reconsideration policy, having as much specificity in there as possible can be really helpful when you're going through the challenge. And often in policies, the request initially goes to either the librarian who's responsible for that collection, often in larger libraries, to do an initial response, and then it can be, or to the director, and then it gets appealed to the board, or to a committee decision through the board. So you can make this process as short or as involved as you like. At my previous library, all requests for reconsideration went immediately to the board, and it was up to the director and staff to defend that material for the board. But I do like there are a couple steps along the way where various folks who are part of the chain of command get to explain their point of view before it officially goes to the board.
Jay, we've got about 5 more minutes. What's another question?
Jody just had a question about, it kind of follows up this one, so it kind of works. I wonder what you suggest if a minor takes out a movie that's rated inappropriate for their age, or a book without a parent there. We've addressed this, I think, over the years. Marianne, you got.
Yeah, there again, the public library staff, they do not act in loco parentis. Who is to say that child's parent and guardian is not asking the child to get those materials and would not approve of those things? When I worked in a small library, not in Iowa, but I had a grandmother who brought her 5-year-old grandson in every week, and every week they would get a stack of slasher films, and the grandmother would say, "Oh, he just loves these," and I cringed because I still don't like those kinds of films. They make me scared. But that was what she and this child watched. So, it's not the public library's duty to establish criteria for what someone checks out, or to impose their personal views on what another individual would want to view or to read. And that's where that ALA, those 2 statements, the freedom to read and the freedom to view statements, that's where those come into play for sure.
Helen didn't have a question, but she had a great comment. Their city had a legislator day, and she attended and brought this topic up about freedom to read, and reminded the importance of supporting libraries, both school and public, and that one group of parents should not dictate to all parents and children on what can be read or included in a library. So there you go. You're locally involved. Very good.
That kind of ties in with something else that we didn't mention here, but I feel like we should. The state library had a presenter recently who talked about a way to interact with new council members, your city council members as the library, and that is to give your new city council members a packet of information about the library. And the suggestion was, just, a flyer about your library and what your services are. But I would also say include your policies and perhaps information about the ALA intellectual freedom statement and freedom to read, freedom to view, those types of things. And I think that our school librarians would probably agree that's a good thing that you could do with school board members as well.
Before sorry, Jay, to interrupt you, before we finish up, since I know we're probably almost at time, I wondered if I could take a moment to say like an unscripted thank you to our colleagues. So I had the opportunity to attend the ILA planning day back in the fall. I don't remember if it's November, I think. And at that time, talking about challenges was sort of an issue that we were talking about at that planning meeting. And it came up like how ILA could help school librarians. And I was thankful that ILA and the Intellectual Freedom Committee and the State Library were so willing to make this collaboration happen and to happen so quickly, because I was kind of like, I want it to happen in January. And that was a really fast turnaround. And I am so thankful the people that are here and the people that were part of the planning process behind the scenes that are not here in the webinar tonight speaking, and that they made this happen because at that time it felt a lot like there was crisis in school libraries. And I think there's a lot of knowledge here in the state of Iowa, and that we can really draw on collaborating with each other. And so it's exciting. I was a little bit teary-eyed when we started tonight just to see this kind of come to fruition and happen. And so I'm excited about the future of how we can collaborate together, and about March and the opportunities that we have. So thank you. So
I was just going to say, but wait, Michelle, there's more. It's not over. We are collaborating again in March. Save the date, March 9th, 2022. And you can see it says to join us for a day of learning. This is going to be an extended presentation opportunity for public library staff and trustees, for school librarians, school board members, administrators, anybody who wants to come and learn more about intellectual freedom and the role that libraries play in the lives of all of our community members, students and citizens alike. And we're excited about it. And we have some ideas for the content that we anticipate for that day. We will be going into more detail. We will be breaking up into breakout sessions, I believe. We'll be doing some role and scenario playing. We'll have some panelists, some additional speakers. But we want you to give us some feedback so that we know, what do you need? What maybe some questions we didn't get to answer tonight, or questions that you have or you think of after tonight. We do have, you can see a please give us feedback survey. And Michelle, Diane, I don't remember which of you developed this, but I'll let you talk about that.
Yeah, we just put together a Google form that asks you some questions to help us to help shape our next presentation, but also just to give us an idea of some of the people that participated tonight, what kind of libraries you serve, about your membership with the organizations that we are all part of, and yeah, just to help us get prepared for March and to understand how we can help you better.
And can you remind us, how are people going to access that survey?
Afterwards, I believe we are sending it out as part of the materials. Yeah. And did we?
It's also linked in the slides, so multiple ways.
Okay.
And were we going to drop it in the chat? I don't remember right before we finished, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Diana, if you want to do that.
Sure, I will grab it and throw it in there quick.
And I know that speaking on behalf of the State Library, as always, we will be sending our public library attendees who registered through Iowa Learns the information for your survey and information about gaining your CE credit. But we will probably be sending you a follow-up message that will have that survey, as well as the slides from tonight and the resource list. And I know that this recording will be on the State Library's YouTube channel. You don't need any kind of a sign-in to be able to access that information. So anybody, regardless of your public library, school library, no library, you can access the recording, and we will have the slides and the resource list included there with that link for the recording. And that should be posted, give us 2 or 3 weeks to get that done, but that will be posted soon.
And there was a question, I believe, from Joan about Wednesday, March 9th being an all-day event. At this point, we're thinking what we will be doing is having 3 sessions over the course of the afternoon and evening. So I think we're planning on public librarians and being covered kind of in the afternoon while school librarians are still at school. And then something maybe in the early evening for school library staff. And then also something that evening or at some point during that day that is specifically for trustees and administrators and those who are not professional librarians, but who do need the background information. It could even be legislators or city council members, anyone who's interested in learning more about it. But we're trying to hit those 3 different audiences with 3 different sessions. So any information you can give us in that survey to help answer their questions, we would really appreciate. Because once again, doing, as Michelle said, doing one webinar in, I don't know, what was it, 8 weeks? No, yeah, about 8 weeks. Granted, we had holidays in there. That was a lot. And I think that getting 3 more done in about that same amount of time is also going to be quite the challenge. But
all those, that learning day in March is all Zoom, correct?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
it's all virtual.
No in person.
Just like
Right.
this.
Someone
It's
just asked. So.
Easy to attend that way. Again, this evening's presentation was presented by the collaboration of these 3 organizations, the Iowa Association of School Librarians, the State Library of Iowa, and the Iowa Library Association. And you can see the URL to access the websites for all 3 of those organizations. Contact information is on all of those websites. And I believe the resource list has contacts for the organizations as well. And don't hesitate, I think all of us have said, we are here to help, we are here to support, we are here to provide education, information, and support. Whether that's a hand to hold, a shoulder to cry on, we are here to support. So don't hesitate to contact any of us. We will gladly do whatever we can to help you. Anybody else have anything, concluding comments?
I'll just second what Michelle said earlier. Thanks to everyone. And thank you everyone for attending this evening.